Discovering that I am the child of a narcissistic parent has been the most liberating fucking experience in my life. Having some understanding of my mother's motivations, and like now hindsight, like, and seeing how codependent my father was, you know what I'm saying, in relationship to his own narcissistic mother, and that she raised a codependent child that would seek a narcissistic mate, and that I was raised a codependent child that would myself seek a narcissistic mate in Courtney, and why my mother and Courtney were so sympathetic to one another, why they got along so well. And just looking at like my mother relationships with my mother as a child, and this dynamic, like, you know what I'm saying, what was the other one called, the severe, and then the other one is called the what,
The covert.
not the immensing or some shit, whatever it is, like where Carol would just come to me and be like, you're such a bad kid, and I'd be like, I'm sorry, mom, I'll do better, but there were no parameters to how I could become a better kid. You know what I'm saying? There was just this assertion, or this charge, or that I was a bad kid. This, you know what I'm saying? This damn, what's the word I'm looking for? This not charge, but this insertion, I guess, because it really had no basis that I was a bad kid. And I remember begging Carol to accept the fact that I was going to be a good kid. Now, no bad kid from this standpoint, and that's one of the things they talk about in narcissism, that child, parent, adult dynamic, where you have to become the parent in relationship to the child, and give the child certain permission in relationship to his right to being angry about certain circumstances that occurred with the actual narcissistic parent. And I realized that no bad child would try to be a good child. You know what I'm saying? If you're a bad child, you're going to accept the fact that you're going to just act on being a bad child. You're not going to feel any guilt in relationship to being a bad child and to trying to live up to the standards of your parent. But this was a dynamic that me and my mother went through my entire teenage years, until I just stopped fucking adhering to it. I mean, at a point where I started rebelling against the fact that I didn't think I was bad anymore. And then I started seeing, and that comes from knowledge of self. About 17. You know what I'm saying? About 17, I started getting really into this self-awareness, into knowledge of self. I started getting into 120, and Carol started really fighting against, like, getting K, her ex-boyfriend, who converted to Saudi Arabian Islam, to convince me of how Elijah Muhammad was on the wrong path. When Carol wasn't concerned about Islam at all during the period of time. Islam was not something that Carol was even, like, it wasn't even a part, and for her to, like, not use a Christian surrogate, but to use an Islamic surrogate, gaslighter. And I'm not saying that Kay was a gaslighter. Kay was, you know what I'm saying, just, doing what he was doing. Larry was just doing what he was doing in relationship to his newfound religion and his belief system in relation to his newfound religion. And Carol was just using him as a means to manipulate. Because she had him do a whole videotape for me and showed me the videotape. Because I now realized that 120 was a threat to her narcissistic personality, or her narcissistic parenting, consciously and unconsciously, because it gave me a certain level of self-confidence that wasn't derived from her. Like Brian, all of Brian's self-confidence has to be derived from Carol. So she'll up her validation of Brian. Brian's brilliant. Brian needs to go back to school in order to re-encourage this, you know what I'm saying, her golden child dynamic. So now that I look at this, I'm like, okay, I see this. I see my lack of desire to gain acceptance from Carol at some point or period of time. Carol no longer validates me. But there's a certain level of codependency that has already been established that I can't see through, because I can't determine Carol's motivations. motivations are important in determining uh, uh, or validating or not validating, or even more so, determining an individual's acts towards you. You know what I'm saying? Their behavior towards you, because it has a motivator, and these values and these goals in relationship to it. Because the values and goals are derived from the motivations. So I didn't understand her motivations. I couldn't see her as a narcissistic, as a parent, narcissistic parent. I didn't see narcissism as being her motivator. And therefore her goals and her values are derived from that same narcissistic motivation. So everything that she was doing as far as her value system and her goals associated with her value system were all derived from narcissistic motivations. So now I see that the narcissistic motivation, and it's a lot easier for me to understand, oh shit, all these unconscious things that were occurring to me that occurred to me before I even turned 17. That were, the need to bring in a narcissistic step parent. Why she chose Calvin over Butch, even though I chose Butch over Calvin. When she gave us an opportunity to choose, oh yeah. And see, even that was a narcissistic parental move. I mean, Carol is a textbook narcissistic mother. Every single fucking goddamn video, every single fucking study might as well have had a picture of Carol and said Carol after every single description of the behavior. Because she runs the spectrum of narcissistic behavior. Like, okay, when the cops came, I just want to take care of my sissy. I need to oh God, Carol. And then Brian needing to be Carol's chief initiating fucking flying monkey. Because he starts to lose his golden child status and starts to become a scapegoat. And needs his original scapegoat in order to foster his codependent relationship with Carol. He can't have that codependent because he doesn't have the emotional confidence to break away from Carol. He hasn't established the emotional fucking confidence, so therefore the psychological confidence, so therefore the mental confidence, his own cognitive confidence to break away his codependency, so therefore he needs to mitigate it. So he needs to bring me back into the picture. And he's motivated by the same narcissistic, codependent motivations to bring me. He doesn't even see it unconsciously. And any sign of an emergency, be it he had my wallet for a year, some death in the family, some illness in the family, like when we were on the street, my father got sick. He had to contact me. It was an emergency in order to bring me back into the fold. It's his narcissistic, codependent, fucking instinct at work. So whatever it is, be it as little as a wallet that he had for a year, and he held it consciously and unconsciously, held my wallet for a year for the purpose of having some means, some motivation in order to motivate him, in order to get me back into the fold, in order to reclaim his golden child position in his codependent relationship with Carol. Just like when he had to have, because Carol followed me to the South. Carol automatically had to come to South Carolina when I moved to Atlanta. See, but she can't admit her codependency in relationship to this relationship. So she has to motivate Brian by moving him to scapegoat. So he's desiring his motherfucking codependent relationship as golden child in order to bring me back into the fold. The dynamic is crazy. And see, I see this shit, and I like the more I see, and it's all about an authentic epistemology. The more authentic my epistemology is, the more authentic my motivations are in relationship to breaking the codependency. Yeah, removing myself from the dynamic altogether. So therefore, I'm no longer a factor. Nah, B. Either you gonna have to break your codependency with old girl, or deal with it on your own as being a scapegoat on your own. But you ain't gonna pull me back into that shit. And I see Elton as the codependent parent. You know, and Elton can't help but be codependent, and he's been delegated to child by Carol. Elton's not a equal parent, just like with Courtney. I've been delegated to child. I'm not an equal parent with her. So therefore, she's created, because she's a narcissist, because her mother's a narcissist. Her father is a co-enabler, and he's as a result of his own narcissistic mother. No. I'm talking about Michael now.
Oh.
His mother's a narcissist. Leola was a narcissist too, and see that dynamic. And you see how heavy it is within the black community?
Yeah.
I mean, narcissistic parenting, family dynamics are so strong within the black community and oversought by the mental health establishment, period. Narcissistic family dynamics are. But black families even more so, because of the lack of black psychologists to even examine this dynamic.
And the black psychologists are narcissists too.
And black psychologists are narcissists too, so they're ingrained in
black women.
Specifically black women who are engaged in the dynamic too. But you gotta look at a woman like Joy DeGroy, who can actually see the dynamic, bring fucking light to the dynamic, but don't even really actually categorize the dynamic as narcissism, because there's a connection to it. See, there's a certain level of, not saying that Joy DeGroy is a narcissist, but there's a certain level of enablement in relationship to the black. She's a black woman. She's not going to want to say certain dynamics about the black woman in relationship to her own trauma. It's a result of trauma, but therefore there's a certain level of responsibility that has to come to that in relationship to dealing with that trauma.
Who did the destruction of black boys?
Jawanzo Kujufu.
Who's that? Is that a female or a male?
He's a male.
Does he mention narcissism?
He doesn't mention narcissism in the destruction of, again, and the thing about it is, Calvin is the one who introduces me to Jawanzo Kujufu. But it's mad that I comprehend Jawanzo Kujufu, because again, if you look at Calvin is the result of, his mother is a narcissistic, is a narcissistic parent. And that co-dynamic is transferred to his sisters, who transfer it to Calvin, but Calvin is the golden child in that dynamic because of the black mammy mentality in relationship to diminishing black women, as far as now they see them as competition in relationship to the black male, in which they make him automatically the golden child in that dynamic. So Calvin was the more fucking viable candidate for Carol kinesthetically. And see, our kinesthetic superiority makes it even more in the dynamic, because we can interpret that unconscious information far more unconsciously, because we have no awareness or no fucking cognitive confidence in our kinesthetic fucking intelligence, or our kinesthetic cognitive capabilities based upon the social dynamic. Nigga, we get into the psychology shit, nigga. And see, even the fact that I can switch from my African American, you know what I'm saying, psychology to the European dominant psychology as far as expressing intellectual fucking prowess. There you go. Or intellectual even dynamics.
Or intellectual independence and competence.
And intellectual competence and find and derive authentic confidence from it. Knowing that authentically I'm a black man in America, and have no problem with utilizing the authentic terminology of an African, and even having the authentic dress and authentic fucking, style of, and still